Welcome to episode 3 of Soapbox Masons. We are thrilled to have a great distinguished panel with us this evening to discuss one-day conferrals in the degrees of the Blue Lodge. Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? What are the pros? What are the cons? So I'd like to start with our distinguished guest. We'll start with Mr. Juan Sepulveda. Juan?
Hello, Matt. Thank you for having me. I'm Juan Sepulveda from the Winding Stairs and the Masonic Roundtable. I hail from the Sunshine State. I'm in sunny Kissimmee, Florida, and I'm a member of Orange Blossom Lodge number 80. Good evening, brothers.
Thank you. And Brother Alex Powers.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for having me on. Brother Alex Powers, past master, Gardner Lodge 65, current director, Kansas Lodge Research, and area deputy grand master for Area 9.
All right, thank you. And Brother Robert Marshall.
Thanks for having me on. I am the current secretary and past master of Waco Masonic Lodge, the marshal of Mercury Lodge in Dallas, and district deputy grandmaster for a district in Texas, and vice chairman of the Grand Lodge of Texas History Committee.
All right. And I am Brother Matt Parker of the North Carolina Masonic Research Society and Wendell Lodge 565 under the Grand Lodge of North Carolina. And before we jump into it, I'd just like to say that the opinions of the host and guests do not reflect any Grand Lodge, lodge, or appendant body. Their views and opinions are their own. So, directing hate mail towards me, that'll be fine. So brothers, let's jump right into it. Several jurisdictions have gone to conferring one-day degrees or one-day conferrals of all 3 degrees where, you show up at the lodge in the morning as a candidate and walk out that afternoon as a Master Mason. What are your thoughts on that? Is that a good thing? Let's start with this. What are maybe some of the potential pros of doing that?
That's a long pause. That's a long, uncomfortable pause, waiting for a positive about them. I would say that the benefit that could come from it, in my opinion, is if you have a very unique circumstance where you have perhaps an individual who is worthy, well qualified to be a Mason, yet has very limited time and availability to partake of all the degrees as the rest of people do. And I've heard of examples for these, perhaps people who are going to be deployed in the military, people that perhaps have some sort of medical condition, and perhaps their life expectancy is not one that would accommodate a long period of time to participate in the degrees. I can see how those would be circumstances in which it would be beneficial to have a one-day conferral as an alternative. And I'll speak my mind on the opposite end later on, so I don't hug the microphone about it.
Those are some pretty good pros. I had not thought of those really. Alex or Robert, do you think of any pros as to the one-day conferrals?
I can think of what would maybe be an expected pro, right? A potential pro. I'll caveat even before I say it by saying I have my doubts as to whether it's actually capable of coming into reality. But obviously, I think a big pro, when I've heard arguments in favor of doing one-day festivals or anything in that direction, is a wave of new members, right? I mean, that's at least outside the context of emergency situations like Brother Sepulveda has just described, which is what in the Grand Lodge of Texas, those situations are actually officially categorized as the Grand Master is given emergency powers, although it's pretty loosely defined what constitutes an emergency. It has historically been used, like with World War I and stuff like that, or the elderly or sick or what have you. But the idea, as I've heard it proposed, is that you may not get some of the good men you will get if they can just jump right through the hoops in a day. That's the idea, at least some of the idea behind it that I've heard. And so there's a pro there, at least hypothetically.
So is it maybe a concept of just casting a wide net and catching as many fish as possible and then just sorting through and the good ones stick, the rest of them you throw back? Or that's probably a bad analogy, but you get so many men who petition for 1-day degrees. What's the retention of these men, or what's the percentage? Is it a majority? Is it a minority that stick around? What's going on there? Just my conversations, I haven't seen any empirical data on that, but just my conversations with brothers in jurisdictions that routinely confer 1-day degrees. They say, look, we confer the degrees, the guys show up for the degrees, and then we never see them in lodge. They never come back. That's it. And then what happens? They don't pay their dues. They're suspended for non-payment of dues, or some of them just outright demit because they determine masonry is not what they thought it was. But again, I don't have the empirical data to back that up. I have anecdotal stories from many brothers where we've had that discussion. And I'm just wondering if we are doing a disservice to men who are truly approaching masonry as a life path, a journey that, for betterment, whether it be for esoteric knowledge or whatever the case may be. Are we doing them a disservice? Are we cheating them out of?
If I may, on that point, we have heard a lot of these anecdotal situations where we discuss what we think is the result of having a 1-day conferral. But I distinctly remember in 2016 when the Masonic Roundtable, we went over to Pennsylvania. The Grand Lodge invited us to the Pennsylvania Academy of Masonic Knowledge, and we had several presentations. I had a presentation, and the other members had one. John Ruark, in particular, had been preparing for almost a year at that point, collecting data about membership statistics from different Grand Lodges. And it was a labor of love. It took him a long time to be able to get. It was not as easy as tapping into one main database that gave him all the information. It was all in many different repositories. But one of the things that he did pay attention in his research was the jurisdictions that had some 1-day conferrals and whether it had an impact, a positive or negative impact on the attrition rate. And I remember that he mentioned that after all the pats in the back and all the celebration that some jurisdictions had done because of the number of men they were able to bring in at once, the numbers were still the same. There was still the same pattern of decline in membership. So whether they came in as 1-day conferrals or whether they came in through the traditional staggered way, they were still declining in the same proportions, or they were still demitting or being suspended for non-payment of dues at a very similar rate. So it wasn't fixing or hurting from the point of view of membership. Now, from the point of view of experience, that's another topic. We had no data for that, but I would bet. I'm not a betting man, but I pay double. The experience is detrimental to the craft.
Yeah. Alex, I saw you nodding your head.
Yeah, it's kind of like Juan said in the beginning, long pause, right? It's one of those conversations to be had. Here in Kansas, one-day conferrals happen. We're not in a state right now where our current leadership team believes in them, and I'm thankful for that. But they have happened in the past during my Masonic experience, and I'm sure they'll happen again in the future. As far as the positives for them, I think it really comes down to perspective. It's a subjective question because positive for who? The main thing that you can really put a positive there for, just like Robert was saying, was that membership aspect, driving those numbers. But who's that the positive for? That's been a age-old battle, long before our time in Masonry. This race for numbers, and it's kind of ties into the whole should we still keep our lodge buildings debate. That's one of those big aspects. We have this huge drive for numbers because we're trying to pay our bills. We're trying to keep up the appearances of what we've had for so long in this massive decline that we're experiencing. And to offset that, you need more people to pay those bills. I guess I'll kind of harp on our initial conversation point of, our opinions don't go for all. I have a very unpopular opinion that I often express, that I think we have too many people in Masonry to start with. I would love to see Masonry be this massive thing that it once was, but I'd also love to see Masonry treated and respected like it once was. I think we're letting way too many people of the wrong opinions and wrong foresights into this craft under an illusion of, kind of what it can be, whatever you want it to be. And then it loses sight of what it is. Historically, I know in many jurisdictions, especially in ours, as was touched on, one-day conferrals came about as a particular mend to the wartime effort. My beef with that is that we placed all the value in that particular circumstance on Masonic burial rites versus your degree. If a Grand Master has the power to say, I can make you a Mason today, you just watch this, I'd say the same Grand Masters could choose to, you're an entered apprentice, I'm going to give you burial rites. I believe we have those today, at least in most jurisdictions. But that's why it was heavily passed out is, these guys they're not going to be here long enough to go to these degrees, and they want to be a part of this. They want to attend these lodges. And what if something happens, and how can we take care of that now? How can we put these honors upon them now? When's the last time you guys saw a ring in the entered apprentice position? They used to make them. They had entered apprentice rings. They had fellow craft rings. You don't see those anymore. And we tell our new guys, hey, you can't don anything of a Masonic liking until you're a Master Mason, because everything that's mass produced today is in the position of Master Mason. What is wrong with being an entered apprentice or fellow craft? Back in the days past, you were expected, you were forced to serve your time in those ranks until you could prove yourself up. And that is sadly gone by the wayside, just out of the convenience of, in today's society, we want everything now. Everything's instant. And I'm as much of a product of that as anybody else. I ordered some studio headphones off of Amazon the other day just because they were same day delivery, and I still haven't seen those. And I lost my mind over that.
They're in the Suez Canal.
They probably are. But that mindset falls into all this, and Masonry is not short of that grouping, of that we want this instant satisfaction. I'm not to trash talk anything. I didn't go through a one-day conferral. I went through, my father-in-law was my mentor. He made me go through what he saw as the proper way. In Kansas here, we don't have to prove up on your Master Mason degree. Once you're a third degree Mason, you're technically done. It's encouraged to prove up, prove your proficiency. But, I was not told that. I proved up in lodge, And I was all proud, and everyone just stared at me. I had one guy in the background like, "You didn't even need to do that." And I was like, "Wait, what?" I was a little PO'd at the time because I put so much hard work into it. But down the road, I was really thankful for that experience. I went through Scottish Rite in a 1-day conferral. I mean, everything. I got there like 6:30 in the morning, had lunch, and didn't leave till the sun went down. I'm just now getting back into Scottish Rite because it kind of turned me off that much. And I can tell you, I don't know much about it. I went through all the degrees, but to this day, everyone asks me, "Are you Scottish Rite?" I pay my dues. I don't claim it because I couldn't tell you anything about the degrees. I saw some cool stuff. I remember about 3 words. It was a dump truck of water over my head. So
Yep.
that experience, it kills it. And
Yep.
why do that?
Yeah, I have for you, Alex. I have I went through a very similar situation where I fortunately, when I went through the degrees, of course I didn't have the fortune that you had. You had someone really close to you who really valued masonry and the understood the value of giving you that full experience and allowing you to pace yourself and really savor what you were going through, which I find it to be a practical thing. If you think about how full of lessons each degree is and how those lessons, they're not easy to apply and they're not easy to master.
Right.
It takes time. Uh, so the practical thing would be considering the number of lessons that you can have within the degree for you to be able to implement them into your life and really prove that you didn't just learn them, but that you are actually putting them to practice. You need some time. But what I was going to say about the Scottish Rite is that I went through the Scottish Rite degrees over 2 weekends. The first weekend, for those of you who may have not gone through the experience, you, at least here in the Valley of Orlando, they do a specific number of the degrees that are mandatory to always happen in any of these festivals, right? And then they alternate the rest. So if you go to the Spring Festival, you witness the 5th, 6th, 7th, whatever are the required ones, and then what was the
Hope that's
17th?
not a sinkhole.
Let me check. Oh, okay. So that happened, and then the following in the fall, if you go to that festival and they switch the ones that are not mandatory, they'll perform them because some are you're part of it, just like any other degree, and the other ones someone just stands there and reads them or explains them to you. And then in the fall, it switches. The ones that were read to you now are performed, and the ones that were performed now are read to you. Anyway, it was a blitz. I couldn't believe how much content was packed into 2 days. It was overwhelming. I was not in my prime when it came to being in the zone and really absorbing the experience at all times. Yes, there were moments of excitement where I was like, wow, this is beautiful. I love that this is happening. I love that this is part of my degree experience. And there were other moments where I was just like reaching for caffeine in any form, pill, coffee, Red Bull, you name it. I had it because it was comfortable chairs, cold air conditioning, low lights. Uh, it was just not conducive to a really um, consistently impressive experience. You were gonna miss things. So here's the solution that I wanted to share with you because I've taken this upon myself and I'm very happy that I decided to do that. What I decided to do was, this is pre-pandemic, is to go to all the festivals, but only go with a goal in mind. So when I first started this, I went because I wanted to see the the 4th, 5th, and 6th degrees. And that was it. So I went early, had breakfast with my brothers, no participation whatsoever. This was just me witnessing, just attentively focusing fully on what was happening, and then taking those months between the spring and fall festival to study what those were all about, and delving deeper and seeing if I could apply some of those things to my life. And then in the fall, I would focus on the 6th, 7th, and 8th. And this is not going to end. I mean, you have 32 degrees to go through. You can do this in the spring and in the fall, and you keep on moving forward, really paying attention to them and implementing to your life. So fortunately, here we have an option. We can decide to do that if we wanted to. In the first 3 degrees, you're at the mercy of whomever is in charge of the lodge. And that's an unfortunate situation, I think.
I think you both hit on something very key. And Alex, going back to what you said earlier about the, well, just to paraphrase, it's all about the dollar, right? Getting large numbers so that we can keep the lights on, so that we can keep our buildings and properties. And, maybe masonry wasn't meant to be as large as it is today. And maybe we put too much emphasis on those properties. And yeah, there's an emotional attachment to these buildings and these Masonic temples. But is that really all it is? Is an emotional attachment? Do we need to, at some point, learn to let go of that and face the reality that maybe we're not going to have those large post-World War II numbers that we saw? Maybe we are going through a downsizing that's not that I think masonry is in any danger of vanishing. Just we're having to deal with revenue issues, revenue losses, and grand lodges and lodges in some areas are in panic mode over that. And then the other part is, talking about the one-day conferrals, almost like drinking through a fire hose. Everything's being thrown at you at once, and then having to dissect that. And Juan, I mean, what you said is great. You make a point to go to these reunions and study certain degrees and just have a laser beam focus on those particular degrees, really dissect those. But how many men are actually going to do that? Or in a blue lodge setting where there are some lodges that are conferring degrees almost every week, and then you have lodges that may confer maybe 1 or 2 degrees a year. These brothers may not have the luxury of actually attending other degrees and really absorbing that. And I'm just afraid that, for the men that are truly serious about the craft, they go through, they see it, and they go, oh, this is what masonry is. This isn't what I thought it was. And then they're gone.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest threats. Yeah. I would throw some historic examples in that kind of complicate the issue. Early on, stonemason in the stonemason to speculative mason transitional area, while it was expected that apprentices spend, say, 7 years in some places as such, they were able to get out of those contracts if they were able to afford to purchase their way out of them. So there's, even all the way back in the operative era, there's always been that lingering capitalistic element of here's the standard, and here's how you can buy your way out of it. So that's always been a problem to some degree, right? And then it was also somewhat common in various regions early on for you to be initiated. Maybe you'd have a meal, a little celebration, a lecture, and then turn around and be passed and or raised in the same night. So it's not like a completely new phenomenon, but it does seem to be a function of candidacy numbers. And so in an era when there's fewer guys trying to join, we tend to lean towards lowering our standards of membership generation and membership advancement, because there's I think, fairly natural idea that, well, if we make this easier, more people will do it. And then
Yep.
in an era when we have a whole bunch coming in. I can tell you, like after the World War I era here in Texas, they expanded the catechism for EAs because they were trying to slow down the massive influx of guys coming in. We went from I think about that time from 55 questions and answers to 75 questions and answers, and we actually maintained that standard fairly well here in terms of the number of questions and answers and memorization, but there's a lot of loopholes in there. Lodges get to determine what qualifies as proficiency. I mentioned before, grandmasters can decide something qualifies as an emergency to advance guys past certain amounts of that work, and so on and so forth. But I think it's interesting to look at who is pushing for what. So I tend to find, this is just anecdotal, but I tend to find, at least down here, I hate to say it, because I love a lot of Shriners, but it tends to be Shriners pushing in favor of getting rid of memory work, reducing memory work, moving towards things like one-day festivals or in that direction. And we'll get some of that sort of influence from elsewhere too, but it seems to be really centered heavily at the shrines. And then on the flip side, your hardcore Scottish Rite guys and your hardcore craft degree guys are pushing in the opposite direction of make them wait 6 months before you take a petition, or add some questions and answers to the memory work, or stuff like that, right? So it's always going to have some kind of what's your favorite part of masonry flavor to deciding which direction you want to push in. But I think you asked the question, Matt. What really becomes important, and what we all too often lose sight of, is the end result for that candidate coming in. Are we selling them short? Are we robbing them of something that could otherwise be a profoundly moving experience? And I have a hard time seeing anything but yes being the answer to that question. I want to. And one other thing I would say for me personally, even though I'm somewhat rather anti one-day festival personally, I still recognize that there are jurisdictions where that is kosher. We've got a couple right here represented, and a process has been worked in those jurisdictions to decide that that's allowed. And so in no way would I ever tell a man who came to masonry through that process that he's less of a mason inherently or anything like that. I know a lot of times when this debate comes up, you'll start seeing guys get real defensive real fast. And there are examples of guys who did stick around, who were retained, who became leaders of the fraternity, or even Grand Lodge officers. And a lot of those guys will often be quick to jump up and say, well, then I wouldn't even be here right now. And I understand that sentiment. And we should, if we are going to criticize one-day festivals, we should be careful not to make any Masons who went through them feel lesser than, because the fact is, if at least in most of the rituals I've seen, if you've been obligated, you're a Mason. So regardless of what your jurisdiction says is also required to validate that process. So yeah, I think it's a much more complicated historically, but also even right now on the here and now issue than it often is made out to be in the legendary debate halls of Facebook.
God bless them. Yeah, I want to share with you a very concrete example of that situation, of a man who found his way into the fraternity through the one-day conferral and ended up having an influence on other brothers in other brothers' experience. I want to say in 2018, I had a conversation with this brother. For those of you who've listened to the Winding Stairs or checked it out on YouTube, you might be familiar with whom I'm talking about. But I sat down with this brother, and he was brought in through the one-day conferral, went in to really experience the fraternity in a very in-depth kind of way, found incredible value in the symbolism, the allegory, and in helping men discover the different facets of masonry. And this man, even though that's the way in which he came in, he was critical of the process. He did not, if given an opportunity to do it again, I I think he would have gone through a paced kind of way. The inspiring component of this is that in my research about Freemasonry, before I became a Mason, before I even knocked at the door, I owned one of his books, and I credit his book for having a substantial influence in me making a decision to become a Mason. And this is no other than Chris Hodap. Chris Hodap is a one-day conferral brother, and yet he's gone on to write numerous books about the craft, to travel extensively to lodges, speaking about Freemasonry, helping people from all walks of lives to have a better understanding of what Masonry is all about. Now, just like Robert was saying, it's no indication of the quality of the man, the process by which he is subjected to participate in. And remember, it's not his choice. Like, he has no clue what's going to happen. For example, knowing what I know now, there are things that I wish I would have had someone advocate for me to experience better. Like, you think of, for example, the preparation room. I find that to be a sublime experience. That should be a very reverent place where you are basically, well, prepared. It's the preparation room. That's where you are primed for the experience you're about to have. I would have preferred if, for my initiation, my personal one, the brothers who had my initiation in charge were more attentive to make sure that's the nature of my experience.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, we were just left in there with a couple of instructions, and the gentleman that I was initiated with was just a chatterbox, just talking about traffic on I-4. For those of you who are from Florida, you know how like sick I'm of hearing about it. Who cares? Like, we're about to go into a life-altering experience right here. How about we get in the mood? Like, no more. And he was it wasn't just like small talk. This man was just like saying all kinds of imprudent things, and I'm like, oh my god, this guy is just ruining this for me. And I was trying to be polite and trying to get in the zone because I knew I was about to experience something great. But in hindsight, uh, if I knew that was supposed to be a sublime experience, I wish someone was there to basically at least nudge on people, knock on the door and say, okay, guys, this is very important. Make sure you keep it quiet or whatever. The other thing, you have the jest that may happen with some people doing goat sounds or laughing, or people just talking or correcting. I think it's beautiful whenever most of the parts of the degree go well, and you can tell the individual really had a cathartic moment. Like, this was really something out of the ordinary for them. Mm-hmm. And it's, by the same token, it's a shame when you know that certain qualities were sacrificed for whichever reason, and the person that pays the price there is obviously the candidate.
I think those are great points, and to your point, Juan, and to Robert's point, I think we do have good men who went through one-day conferrals. I mean, there are men who have never petitioned to join the lodge, and I know these men personally, and I can't help but say, you have the heart of a Mason. You don't necessarily have to have gone through degrees to have the heart of a Mason. So, just going through one-day degree does not make you any less of a Mason. I think Chris Hodap is absolutely an example of that. But then I look back, and it took me about 7 months to go through all 3 degrees and to learn the catechisms and everything that went with that. And at that time, I thought that was taking entirely too long. I couldn't wait to get through it. But that's because the gentlemen in my lodge, brothers in my lodge, were encouraging me to hurry up and, okay, when are you going to do your fellowcraft degree? When are you going to do your Master Mason degree? They were just trying to rush me through the degrees to throw me in an officer chair. And looking back, I thought, man, I would love to take a year between each degree and really be able to dissect every little thing, because to me, the degrees build on top of each other, and you can't really grasp the fellowcraft degree until you have a good grasp of the entered apprentice degree. And you can't grasp Master Mason degree without the fellowcraft and entered apprentice degree. And so I'm just wondering if we have cheated them. In Chris Hodap's case, I mean, he's really made an effort to really dissect, go through the degrees. He took it upon himself to investigate, learn those things, but a lot of men just don't have the gumption to do that themselves. We are unfortunately in a society where everyone expects instant gratification, and I think some lodges or grand lodges try to cater to that. Just my opinion. I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus.
Yeah, Matt, you've mentioned that, and Alex mentioned it too. The proclivity for modern men and modern people in general to want that instant gratification. But let me play the devil's advocate here. Me being of this extraordinary generation, I'm not a millennial, I'm Gen X. I preferred the full-blown experience, and just like you mentioned, I would have loved to take even longer in my experience. What I've noticed is that the people advocating for a more expedient process were never the candidates. It was always someone else in between wanting to push them along. And it doesn't end in the 3rd degree. Then you have people hitting you over the head with the petition for the York Rite and for the Shrine and for the Scottish Rite and the Grotto and all of the rest. I made a commitment as soon as I joined Masonry and I started understanding. I'm nosy when it comes to this kind of stuff. Like I don't like relying on other people. I like finding out the information for myself and then making decisions that are going to impact my following steps. So I saw the pattern, and I saw how on the night that I was raised to the sublime degree, how quickly I was just surrounded by people trying to tell me, oh, this is where you need to head so that you can expand your experience and blah, 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 blah. And I thought, okay, wait a second. There's all these options. Just because this guy presented it nicely doesn't mean that that's what's good for me. Because the person that presents me the opportunity to go into the York Rite, for example, he might have been very eloquent about it, and he might have been very persuasive and very charismatic. And then the person presenting me the opposite path might have sucked at, might have had like a very lousy and not lousy, lazy explanation for it. And then is that the one criteria for me to make a decision of where I'm going to spend my dues money and where I'm going to spend my time? So I saw, okay, wait a second. I didn't like this whole dynamic of, people just jumping on me with commitment. So I started looking, okay, what is the York Rite all about? And what can I find from the Scottish Rite without ruining surprises that I want to experience? I don't watch trailers for movies. I just need to know a little bit about it, and that's enough. So I started asking and trying to find out, okay, what is it about these things that fits me as an individual? And once I recognized it was the Scottish Rite, that was right. That's what I felt that was my next step, to go to the Scottish Rite. But I made a decision. I'm not going to go in that direction until I've spent enough time in these 3 degrees studying, practicing, conveying the degrees myself, doing all of that before then I moved on to the Scottish Rite. So for brothers who perhaps are just recently went through the same experience and they just were rushed through the degrees, or they were part of a one-day conferral, my advice to them would be pace yourself. Make sure you didn't miss anything from these initial 3 degrees, and spend some time. Get to know the chairs, get to know the degree, witness a few without any participation. You know how I find that incredibly valuable, that you just go to visitor lodge that's going to hold the degree, sit down and watch. No conducting, no nothing, no roles. Sit down and just witness it and put yourself in their shoes. I find that to be incredibly insightful, because you put yourself in that experience again, and then you can go home excited, motivated, inspired to either learn a little bit more or implement some of those lessons. And pace yourself. Then find out what's the next step. York Rite. If you want to have a next step, I mean, it's not mandatory.
Right.
York Rite, Scottish Rite, Grotto, Shriner, Tall Cedars Lebanon, you name it. Pick what fits your life route, and then pace yourself as you go in there. But a lot of these brothers, they don't know what they don't know, so they're at the mercy of whomever is helping them out, and that can be unfortunate at times. But
So many
Yeah.
great points there. Like so many great points. You know, I had it on my list here to bring up. Both of you guys touched on it. All three of you guys touched on it. Sorry. Um, as far as the brothers that have gone through those one-day conferrals, that is extremely important to point out. That I don't, I can't say everybody, right? But I think the majority of people that have a beef with a one-day conferral has nothing to do with the guys that have gone through it. It's the system that we feel is cheating their journey. And you know, when it comes down to it, everyone expresses Freemasonry as all these different things. One of the biggest one is, you know, Freemasonry is a charity. It's not. Charity is something we do. That's not what we are. What people in today's society really forget about is Freemasonry in its essence is selfish. It's supposed to be. It's about me. It's about you. It's about that individual experience. Birds of a feather flock together. We come together with these like-minded men and joining these temples for that joint experience, to bring that together, because that furthers our path. But at the end of the day, the importance in Masonry for me is me. And the importance of Masonry for you is you. And if the importance of Masonry for you is somewhere else, I'm sorry, you're missing the point. And maybe someone put you on the wrong path there, but you're missing the point. So many good things
oh, I
to
love it.
touch
I
on.
love that, bro.
There's so many
I
good things to touch on. Another factor, you know, Robert brought up was about the shrine. You know, I'm not going to trash talk the shrine by any means, but you do see that in a large way in their marketing tactics. You know, and the reason I was going to bring up the whole factor of, you know, at least for me, I personally don't have anything wrong with people that have gone through the one day. It's the system itself. Is just a couple weeks ago at our grand annual session, one of the bylaws that was proposed was by a past shrine big name. I'm not going to get into names and all that, but he proposed to put into our constitutional bylaws that it would be mandatory that we hold 2 one-day conferrals every year. Mandatory. It got shot down, thankfully. One of our past grandmasters, good friend of mine, got up and spoke, I mean, word for word to what I wanted to say to that experience. As we were walking out of there, a brother came up and just abruptly grabbed him, and you can tell he was just distraught. He was offended. He was hurt on a deep level, because he took everything he said towards, you're a fake Mason. You know, that he never said those words, but that's how it was taken. And it's like, brother, this is not because of you. You know, we're fighting for what we wanted you to go through, to benefit from. And you know, you're one of those that stuck around, and that's awesome, and we applaud you for that, and we hope you get the fulfillment in that journey. But there's so many men out there that are missing that. because we cut those corners. And that's just one of those things. I mean, we're Masons, right? Like that's what we talk about. We don't cut corners, we make right angles. And stuff like this is just, I mean, by the book, it's cutting corners. It's totally taken away from that. We have a lodge here, a TO lodge. Obviously people have their opinions about those. But they have it in there, and I don't know the exact rule for that lodge, but you have to wait X amount of years before you can progress this to the next degree. There was a brother, I'd went through my master's and everything, and I'm feeling high and mighty, and he'd been an entered apprentice this entire time. I'm taking on other positions, and he's still an entered apprentice. And in that particular lodge, it was explained to him ahead of time, right? This is what happens typically, and this is what happens here, and this is what you could take of a route, and this is what the route will be like here. We're going to make your experience this way, but if you want an easier way, this isn't the lodge for you. That brother is one of the most content and happy brothers because he has a deep and meaningful and fulfilling experience that I'm honestly jealous of. I worked in electrical for many years, both regular electrical and low voltage. And there's that constant saying, electrical current is going to follow the path of least resistance. You can get into the whole dynamics of what we are and how we're all electrical current at the end of the day. Human nature is in that manner the same way. We're like-minded. We will follow the path of least resistance. I was in the same boat Juan's talking about. When I'm going through my degrees, I'm like, dude, this is not fast enough. I want to go, 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 go. Let's go. Now that I've been through it, I'm that guy that's like, man, I honestly kind of wish I was still in EA. Like I would be milking it and enjoying it right now. I shouldn't be here, but I am. And I was warned early on by my father-in-law, who's my mentor, take your time through the degrees. Actually, I started a fight, not intentionally, in my lodge at the time, that actually had a guy not come back to lodge. And I felt horrible about that, but I didn't know what was going on. They had a system set up where they only practiced each degree every 3 months. So for these 3 months, they only open on entered apprentice. And then the next 3 months, they only open fellow craft and then only open master mason. So if they're on fellow craft and you want to petition, you're waiting all those months until they're an EA and they can accept you. Like-minded, if you finish your EA and you're ready to prove up in 2 days, you still have 3 months before you can take your next degree. I was booking along. I did mine in just a few months, and no one said anything about my fellow craft. It was just kind of like, whatever. I really wanted to do my Master Mason because they had a joint meeting coming up with the Prince Hall Masons. I'd only ever heard of them. I didn't really know much about it. And I was like, oh, I've got to be there for that. But you had to, or in Prince Hall, I'm sorry, they close every meeting, at least in our jurisdiction here. They close every meeting, no matter what, on a Master Mason. So I had to be Master Mason to attend. And I was pushing to prove up in time for that. And one of the gentlemen of the lodge stood up and just red in the face. And he's like, we spent months working out this plan. If we're not going to follow it, why did we even waste our time? And, they're like, well, we don't have brothers knocking down our doors to go through these degrees. Brother Alex, is eager. So let's let him on through. He left the lodge, didn't see him again. And that's unfortunate. His heart was in the right place. I didn't know any of that plan. I didn't know the thought process behind that plan. I do now. And I think it's a good plan. Both on the aspects of that lodge was very proficient on all degrees, not just like some of our lodges, we get so stuck on opening Master Mason and then an EA shows up and you're like, let's study real quick. You don't deal with that because you have this regular rotation where you really know your work and you're in tune with it. But also you have that time to gain respect for that degree that you're in. The last point I'll make here, in an aspect of life, I'm pretty sure, and I can't say it verbatim, I'm pretty sure it was Pike, and I want to say it was Esoterica in which he wrote it. But he's talking about the 3 craft degrees. And he's saying, we make it through entered apprentice, fellow craft, master mason. We gain these high titles. And he goes, in all honesty, most men pass away in their experience on this plane of earth as no more than an entered apprentice. They may have never truly, in their journey, passed on to the degree of a fellow craft. You know, that piece of paper really doesn't mean anything. It's like marriage. You can go get married, but if you don't have that relationship, that commitment built in, what is that piece of paper? It doesn't matter. And those words, when I read that from Pike, really impacted me. I was like, that's pretty dang true and profound. Where am I? Because I'm not a master. You know, I've got a long ways to go on my journey. So it's hard to convey that, because I think anyone in today's society, you know, they want that sense of accomplishment, and I'm no stranger to that. But I think we can all agree at the same time, we get that, and it's like, man, hindsight's 2020. I wish I could have done it this way. So to those of you out there that may, you know, have been through one day and maybe arguing with that, just know that's where our hearts are mainly at, right? Like, we're trying to better not just the experience, which is key, but that experience is going to dictate your journey. And at the end of the day, your journey is the entire point here. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. And I'll just say this, you know, any brothers who are watching this that went through one day conferrals, like Robert says, like Alex and Juan have said, it doesn't make you any less of a Mason. You know, and our point is that if you're watching, honestly, I'll tell you, I believe that if you're watching this episode, then you are a true Mason. You have the heart of a Mason. Our concern is it a disservice? Is there something that's being left out of the Masonic experience or the initiatic experience? You know, and we've all told some personal stories. And for me, it wasn't until I decided to actually go back and really dig into the degrees much deeper, because once I was rushed through the degrees in my Blue Lodge, they were never spoken of again. And so there was never anyone to sit down with me and talk to me about those degrees and really break those apart. And I didn't understand the Master Mason degree until I understood the Entered Apprentice and Fellowcraft degree. And I realized, you know, Alex, to what you were saying, I have a firm belief, it's like what Pike said, that the degree of Master Mason is not what we are, it's more of what we aspire to be. That's our goal. More often than not, all of us, you know, and we're all very active Masons on here, but we probably spend more time in that Entered Apprentice realm than we do anything else, right? And I think that goes for all of us. But if we don't understand the degrees, can we really hope to function in the Fellowcraft realm or the Master Mason realm, so to speak? So let's do this. We've been going about an hour. I'd like to go around just like get some final comments from everyone.
Sure. I wanted to mention something that both of you actually touched on it. The fact that what we're fighting is for your experience. Whenever we bring these topics up, we have these conversations and we start exploring whether this is good or bad. We're not doing this for us. We go through the degrees once and then that's it. But I find that in receiving the lessons of Masonry, we become stewards of something that is incredibly valuable, that it really can be the catalyst for changing a man and transforming a life into one that is better, more fulfilling, more influential. And by us having these discussions and trying to explore whether this is good or bad for the fraternity, what we want is to make sure that for those who haven't been initiated yet, for them to have the best experience possible. Those who have been initiated already through this method, that they don't feel any less because they went through that particular process, that we're all in this together and we are stewards of this knowledge. And I think we do a great service to not just the craft, but to society as a whole, whenever we make sure that we preserve the dignity that is encapsulated in the Masonic degrees, we actually help our fellow men whenever we bring more reverence into the entire experience, because we make it even more, even richer for the people that go through it. So if you missed out, if your experience for some reason was compromised, whether it was by some chit chatter in the preparation room or whether it was by being rushed through the degrees, just take it upon yourself to live vicariously through that brother that you're preparing for the initiatic experience. Make sure that you're crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's, and making sure that no one is in an attitude of jest in moments that should be solemn, that people are paying attention to the quality of the degree. People are memorizing the work and making sure that they deliver it with the with as much uh, quality as possible. That's all we want. We're fighting for you. We want to make sure that you and uh, the people that come after you get an experience that is cathartic and actually fulfills on that promise of Masonry taking good men and making them better. Thank you again for the invitation, brothers. I appreciate it.
So I absolutely love what you just said, Juan. We are fighting for you, 100%. Can't say it better. With that, I have to largely just echo off of what Juan said there. You know, those points are 100%. I think it's super important to realize, you know, as we kind of harped on there, all it's about is that journey and your journey. You know, most of us go through Masonry so quick. We go through the chairs in our lodge so quick. We serve as master, past master, secretary. We take on Grand Lodge roles. I'm one of those guys. I have a hard time saying no. I bite off more than I can chew way too often. Um, and then you stop and look back, and it's like, holy cow, why? Like, why am I trying to fit this lifetime of stuff into a month? You know, like in the big picture of it. How Pike says there, you may end your life as an entered apprentice. That's not a bad thing. You know, I mentioned early on about the old jewelry back in the day and having entered apprentice rings and fellow craft rings. You know, when you go into a lodge, we tell all of our guys everything in this room has meaning, has a purpose, has a story. One of the first things people see in our lodge that you know I love to talk to them about is our ashlers. You have the rough ashlar and the perfect ashlar, and you kind of tell that exact story of your degrees right there. Is, you know, this is what we start out as, and this is what we're aiming towards. The thing that I think in human nature we often forget, and in our Masonic journey, rushing through to accomplish these titles of now I'm a past master, now I'm a district deputy, now I'm this, now I'm that. It's not a like done and said thing. Just because you're chipping away at that ashlar doesn't mean you're going to be perfect. We don't achieve perfection within our life. But what's important to understand is no matter how hard we're chipping, we also grow imperfections. And there's things in my life that I feel like I've worked through, and then they pop up again. And you got to keep up that work. You may go from a fellow craft state back to an entered apprentice for a while. Those titles are not gold in this situation. It's the journey and the product that you aim to have at the end of that journey. I think that wildly gets away from us, but that is the purpose. You got to remember, Masonry's selfish. It's about you. All that other stuff we talk about, I'm not discrediting that. It's all true. It's all there. We impact our communities. We impact the world. We impact our widows and orphans. But we do that as a byproduct of the betterness that we've brought out of ourselves. If you aim to just do that, that's not the goal here. And you're skipping so much else, and you're losing sight and really losing benefit so much else. when you put yourself on that path and you bring those lessons into a practical application within your life, all that other stuff happens naturally. And I think that's the beautiful part of Freemasonry. And the experience within our ritual really sets us up for the right mind frame for that, the right understanding, and the right appreciation. Without truly understanding what we're saying and what we're doing, I think a lot of us just go about it mindfully. We're just trying to accomplish this to get to that, and we don't really know why. You know, when we go through, I hear a lot of guys talk about, well, you know, why all the theatrics? Why do I need to memorize this? At that point, it's not about you. You, at that point, are in charge of setting the next guy on his path. You have your own journey set at that point. You've been given your tools. You've been guided into your path. And now it's your turn to pass on that initiatic experience and hopefully set the next craftsman onto the correct path. And if we understand what we're saying, it's going to come across a lot better. And hopefully he'll understand what's truly meant to be done within our journey. So with that, I have nothing against one day Masons. I have something against the concept of a cheapened one day Masonry. It's a lifelong journey, and there's no way you can get around that. You can call it what you want to, the journey's still there. So with that, I want to thank you so much for having me on this episode. It's been a true pleasure. I think both Robert and I totally forgot to give a shameless plug to our podcast, Historical Light. So I'll just throw that out there now. But thank you so much for having us on. It's been a pleasure.
Well, please do. I was going to ask each of you to give a shameless plug. Juan, I know you've got a couple of plugs.
I'll go easy on you. Yeah, we invite you to check out every Thursday night at 9:30 on YouTube. You can find the Masonic Roundtable. We have discussions about Freemasonry and ancillary conversations about it. We've been doing it for over 7 years. I've really enjoyed every step of the way. There's a lot to learn in Masonry, and we try to make it something that's easily accessible for everyone. So the Masonic Roundtable is the podcast that I'm in. The Winding Stairs is the podcast that I began back in 2012. It's also about Freemasonry, specifically about the practical application of Masonry, it's my wheelhouse. That's what I enjoy the most, finding how do you put to practice the lessons of Masonry. And finally, the Gentleman's Brotherhood. This is not exclusive to Masons. This is just men who want to have a clear understanding of what it means to be a gentleman in the 21st century. Head over to thegentleman'sbrotherhood.com. Thank you.
And I have really been enjoying the Gentleman's Brotherhood. That is fantastic. So kudos on that.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. And Robert, I know you had to step away for just a moment, but do you have any closing comments, remarks, or plugs you'd like to make? Busy Bee Coffee, for instance?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Sounds good.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. I actually ended up driving across town home. I'm up on my roof now. But as far as closing comments, so I wasn't able to catch the rest of what the guys were saying, but I would say that, at least based on what was said before I had stepped out, it seems like we probably generally agree that you could reasonably expect that a man who went through the degrees in a slower manner, men who do on average are going to be going through a more meaningful and profound experience over time than what you would get in a one-day fire hose experience on average. And I think that's something that really can't be overstated in deciding whether it's worth it or not to go that route. But and I enjoyed being on here with you guys as when I could. I'm sorry for stepping out. It's always an honor to speak with all of you guys. this is the first time I've been hosted by you, Matt. It's a great honor. I really enjoy your lectures, but also just general projects that I have worked with you on. And I've been a guest on both Juan's Winding Stairs project, as well as a rabid poster in his group for years, which he has been very kind in tolerating, because a lot of them are kind of controversial memes and things like that to get conversations going. But thank you for that hospitality over the years, Juan. We missed a very good chance to hang out when a travel buddy of mine had a heart attack on the way to the airport, which robbed you and I of a couple of days together, which I still hope to make up for sometime soon. And of course, Alex had me on as a guest, not a ghost, maybe a ghost, I don't know, on Historical Light a couple times before I came on as a co-host there. So Alex and I are cohorts in a number of ways, and have a pretty interesting planned adventure coming up together. So yeah, I really value all three of you guys. And I would say that I didn't go through a one-day experience, but I did go through a very rushed experience. I was rushed because another lodge in the area of my home lodge had an outdoor degree that the members of my lodge really wanted me to attend so that they could get an award for having the most members of their lodge in attendance. And so I got really rushed to the EA Fellowcraft and Master's work. And in some ways I do regret it. So as someone who went through relatively fast, I can say that personally, I wish it had been a slower experience for me. And I've seen success at my lodge with us intentionally slowing that process down for others. So as far as plugs go, catch us on Historical Light, my memes on Winding Stairs through the Busy Brew Masonic Coffee Project. That's just a lodge coffee that we produce, grown in Colombia and Honduras, blended and roasted in Waco, and then packaged by grumpy past masters of Waco Masonic Lodge. It's the second drink invented by a Waco past master, the first being Dr. Pepper.
Nice.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess that's really all I have plug wise. I'm not as proactive as the rest of the guys in this group, which is just one more reason I'm so honored to share you all's company. So yep, I will I'll plug something that's not Masonic exactly. This is from the Blue Owl Brewery, and I'm plugging it because RJ Johnson, Robert Johnson, and I have a shared affinity for owl imagery. Probably one or more of you guys also appreciate the old owl emblem.
Indeed.
The Blue Owl Brewery is in Austin, Texas, and Brother Byron Webster of Austin Lodge introduced it to me because he learned that I like sour beers, and that's the only kind of beer they make. So this is a sour session beer with Earl Grey tea, which I expected to be awful and turned out to be pretty good.
Sounds really interesting. All right, well, brothers, I appreciate each and every one of you being here tonight. I think there were some great comments made, great observations. And what I'll say, and like Juan said, you know, we're fighting for you. Just because you went through a one-day conferral doesn't make you any less of a Mason. And I will tell you that, you know, there are brothers who did not go through one-day conferrals, but the quality of the degrees that they went through was haphazard, and honestly, they were deprived just as much. So it is about the quality of the degree, making the impact. And if you went through a one-day degree, I would just encourage you to really take a deep dive into each degree, dissect them, research, read Wilmshurst, read Steinmetz, read McNulty. Pick up these books, really dig into it, and don't take the author's word for what something means. Make your own decisions. Look at it, analyze it, decide what it means for you, because it's going to mean something different to each one of us individually. And that's the beauty of the craft and Masonic degrees, is it is, as Alex said, a little selfish, not in a bad way, but it's a very personal thing. So it's not something that you can easily express to someone else or expect them to understand your journey. But brothers, again, I appreciate each and every one of you being here this evening. It has been a fantastic discussion, and I hope to have each and every one of you back.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you for having us, brother.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.